I had her file open on the passenger seat the entire drive up. Not because I needed the information, I'd already read it twice, but because it gave me something solid to look at while the road narrowed and the houses thinned out. Names, dates, check marks. Proof that this visit had a reason. Proof that I wasn't just driving up a hill toward a place everyone else seemed to have quietly agreed to forget. Widow, late 70s. Lives alone. No immediate family. Routine welfare check overdue. That was it. No warnings. No notes from previous social workers. Just an address and a reminder to assess living conditions and mental state. The road ended sooner than I expected. The asphalt gave way to cracked concrete, then gravel. Trees crowded in on both sides, their branches arching overhead like they were slowly reclaiming the path. At the top of the hill, set back behind a rusted iron gate that no longer closed properly, stood the house. Villa was the word that came to mind, though it felt generous. It must have been beautiful once. Tall windows, a wide front porch, stonework darkened by decades of rain and neglect. Now it looked tired. The roof sagged slightly in places. Ivy crawled up the walls unchecked. The yard was overgrown, grass waist-high in some areas, bushes warped into unnatural shapes. No lights were on. I cut the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to it tick as it cooled. The air was still. No traffic, no voices. Just the faint sound of wind moving through leaves. This wasn't the kind of place people visited by accident. I grabbed my bag, locked the car out of habit, and walked up the cracked stone path toward the front door. Each step felt louder than it should have. Gravel crunching, shoes brushing tall grass. The doorbell didn't work. I knocked. For a moment, nothing happened. I was already rehearsing what I'd write in the report if no one answered when I heard movement inside. Slow footsteps, deliberate, not shuffling. The door opened just enough for a face to appear. She was smaller than I expected. Thin, but not frail. Gray hair pulled back neatly. Her eyes were clear, alert, studying me with quiet curiosity. "Yes?" she asked. I introduced myself, gave her my name, my role, the reason for the visit. I kept my voice calm, professional, the way you're trained to do it so people don't feel accused just because someone sent you. She listened without interrupting, nodding slightly. "Oh," she said when I finished. "You must be cold. Please come in." She opened the door wider and stepped aside. I hesitated for half a second, long enough to notice the darkness behind her. The house was dim, even in the afternoon light, curtains drawn, lamps unlit. Then I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not anything sharp or alarming, just old, stale air that hadn't been properly circulated in years. Dust, wood, something faintly sweet underneath it all, like food left out too long. The door closed behind me with a heavy sound. Inside, the house felt larger than it had from the outside. High ceilings, long hallway stretching deeper into shadow. The furniture looked original, heavy, dark wood, worn but carefully maintained. Everything was clean, but untouched, like a place preserved rather than lived in. "You can put your things there," she said, gesturing to a small side table. "Thank you," I replied. She moved slowly but steadily, leading me further inside. As we walked, I noticed how quiet the house was. No ticking clocks, no hum of appliances, no distant television murmuring to fill the space. We entered the dining room. I stopped without meaning to. The table dominated the room. Long, polished wood, large enough to seat 8, maybe more. It was fully set. Plates, silverware, glasses, napkins folded neatly. Not one place setting. Several. My first thought was that she was expecting company. My second thought was that there were too many chairs. They surrounded the table, pulled out slightly, as if people had just stood up from them. The arrangement was symmetrical, careful, intentional. She noticed my attention and smiled. "I like to keep things ready," she said. "For guests?" I asked. "For family," she replied easily. I made a mental note but didn't comment. Widows often clung to routines, rituals. It was common enough. She gestured to one of the chairs. "Please, sit." I hesitated again, then did as I was told. The chair felt solid beneath me, its wood cool through my clothes. From this angle, I could see the entire table. Every plate was spotless, the cutlery aligned perfectly. She took a seat at the head of the table. Up close, she didn't look confused or disoriented. Her movements were precise, her posture straight, her gaze steady. "So," she said, folding her hands, "what would you like to know?" I asked the standard questions: how she'd been feeling, whether she had trouble getting groceries, if she'd had any recent falls, if anyone checked in on her. Her answers were polite, brief, coherent. "I manage just fine," she said. "I've lived here a long time." "How long exactly?" I asked, pen poised over my notebook. She thought about it. "Most of my life." "And your husband?" I asked gently. A pause. "He passed many years ago," she said. "The house has been quiet since then." I nodded, jotting it down. As we talked, my eyes kept drifting back to the table. The extra settings, the empty chairs, the way the light from the window caught the glassware, making it look almost like someone had just polished it. "Do you have family nearby?" I asked. Her smile returned, softer this time. "Oh yes," she said. "They're always with me." I forced a polite smile in return, though something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. "Do they visit often?" I asked. She looked down at the table, then back at me. "Every evening." I laughed lightly, instinctively. "That must be comforting." "It is," she agreed. The laugh felt wrong as soon as it left my mouth. There was no humor in her expression, no hint of metaphor. She spoke with the same matter-of-fact tone she'd used to answer everything else. I cleared my throat. "Do you ever feel lonely here?" She seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "No," she said. "Why would I?" I didn't have an answer for that. Silence settled between us. Not awkward, just heavy. I became acutely aware of the space around me, the high ceiling, the still air, the empty chairs. For the first time since arriving, I felt like I had stayed too long. "Well," I said, closing my notebook, "I think that covers everything for today." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened slightly. "Already?" she asked. "You've barely sat." I glanced at my watch. Only 20 minutes had passed. "I have a few more visits today," I said. "Of course," she replied. Then, after a moment, "You'll stay a little longer, won't you?" It wasn't a question. I opened my mouth to decline. Then I felt it. That subtle, creeping sense of unease. The kind that doesn't announce itself as fear. The kind that just whispers that something isn't quite aligned. I told myself it was nothing. Just an old woman. Just a strange house. Just nerves. I nodded. "Just a few more minutes," I said. Her smile widened. "Good," she said. "Dinner will be soon." I looked down at the table again. At the empty chairs. At the place setting directly in front of me. And for the first time since stepping into the house, I felt a quiet, persistent thought settle in my chest. I wasn't just visiting. I had been seated. I told myself there was nothing strange about it. That was the easiest explanation, and the one my mind kept reaching for whenever my eyes drifted back to the table. Old habits die hard, especially after decades. People cling to routines when everything else has been taken from them. Grief reshapes behavior in ways that look unsettling from the outside but make perfect sense to the person living inside it. That's what this was, I decided. Habit, loss, ritual. The widow rose from her chair with quiet efficiency. "You'll stay for a little while," she said again, as if confirming something that had already been decided. "I don't get many visitors these days." "I understand," I replied, though something about the word visitor felt suddenly inaccurate. She moved toward the sideboard against the far wall. Every step was steady, no hesitation, no stiffness in her joints. She opened a drawer and removed folded napkins, smoothing them with careful hands before placing them on the table, one by one, each setting identical. "I usually eat around this time," she said casually. "It helps keep the day in order." "That's good," I said. "Structure can be important." She nodded, approving. "Yes, especially when you're waiting." "Waiting for?" I asked, then immediately wished I hadn't. She looked at me as if the answer should have been obvious. "For them." I forced a smile. "Of course." She returned to the kitchen area, partially hidden behind a doorway. I heard the soft clink of plates, the sound of cutlery being adjusted. The smells grew stronger then, warm, unmistakably recent. Something savory, something cooked, fresh. That caught my attention. Most of the widows I visited relied on ready-made meals or canned food. Some barely ate at all. This smell belonged to something prepared with intention, not convenience. When she came back into the dining room, she carried a serving dish covered with a lid. Steam curled up from the edges. She set it down gently in the center of the table. I stared at it. "You cook every evening?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "It wouldn't be right otherwise." She lifted the lid just enough to check the contents, then replaced it. I caught a glimpse of food that looked not just edible, but appetizing. Meat, vegetables, still glistening. "Do you mind if I ask who you're cooking for?" I said carefully. She didn't look at me right away. Instead, she reached for the silverware and adjusted one of the forks, aligning it perfectly with the plate. "My family," she said. "They've always come home for dinner." I flipped a page in my notebook, more to buy time than because I needed to write anything. "Your children?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "My husband, my sister, my parents." I froze my pen mid-air. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "Your parents?" "Yes." "And they live nearby?" I pressed. Her smile didn't waver. "Not anymore." I nodded, the shape of the answer settling uncomfortably in my mind. The file had said no immediate family, no mention of children, no siblings listed as living. "How long have they been visiting?" I asked. She paused, thinking. "Oh, years," she said. "Longer than I can remember." I laughed, a light, nervous sound that came out wrong. "Well, that's dedication." She didn't laugh with me. Instead, she reached for a plate and began serving the food. Not onto one plate, onto all of them. She moved clockwise around the table, spooning careful portions onto each dish. The food didn't sit untouched or decorative. It was arranged the way you would if someone were about to eat it. Portions adjusted subtly, as if tailored to individual preferences. When she reached the place setting in front of me, she hesitated. Then she served it too. "Oh," I said quickly. "You don't have to." "You should eat," she interrupted gently. "You're part of the table now." Part of the table. I swallowed. "I appreciate that, but I really can't stay for dinner." She looked at me then. Truly looked at me. Her eyes were calm, patient, almost kind. "They'll be here soon," she said. The words were simple, ordinary. Something about the way she said them wasn't. I chuckled again, softer this time. "I don't want to impose." "You're not," she replied. "You're expected." That word sent a chill through me. I glanced around the room. The chairs sat empty, their backs catching the dim light from the windows. The air felt thicker now, warmer from the food, heavy with smell and stillness. I noticed details I hadn't before. Small scratches on the table surface in front of some chairs. Silverware that showed signs of repeated use. A glass with a faint smudge on the rim, as if someone had already lifted it earlier. "You must get tired, cooking for so many," I said, trying to keep my voice even. She shook her head. "It's easier when everyone comes home." I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of how deep into the house I was, how far the front door felt. "You mentioned your husband passed away," I said carefully. "Was that a long time ago?" "Yes," she said, "but he never misses dinner." The room seemed to lean inward at that. I told myself she was confused, that grief had blurred timelines, that she spoke in metaphor. That was my job, after all, to interpret, to contextualize, to explain away what didn't fit neatly. Still, I found myself standing. "I should really be going," I said. "I've already stayed longer than planned." She stopped serving. Slowly, she turned toward me. "Sit," she said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was firm. I hesitated, my body responding before my thoughts could catch up. I sat back down. Her expression softened again. "You don't need to rush," she said. "Everyone arrives eventually." The sentence hung in the air, unfinished in a way that made my chest tighten. She took her own seat at the head of the table and folded her hands, posture perfect. She didn't eat. She just waited. Minutes passed. The food steamed quietly. No footsteps sounded in the house. No doors opened. No voices drifted in from other rooms. I glanced at my watch. Time felt strangely elastic, stretching and compressing in ways I couldn't quite track. "Do they ever arrive late?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Sometimes they need encouragement." I didn't ask what she meant. Instead, I forced another laugh. "Well, I suppose I should let you enjoy your family time." She smiled, wider now. "That's very thoughtful of you." I pushed my chair back slightly. Her hand came down on the table with a soft, decisive tap. "Please," she said, "stay." I looked at the place setting in front of me. The food, the fork, the knife positioned exactly the way mine would have been at my own family's table years ago. Against my better judgment, I picked up the fork. The metal was warm, used. I set it back down immediately. "I think," I said, my voice tight, "I've overstayed my welcome." Her eyes flicked briefly to the empty chairs. "No," she said calmly. "You've arrived right on time." The house creaked then, a low sound from somewhere deeper inside. Not the settling of old wood, something heavier, something deliberate. She didn't react. She just smiled at the table. "They don't like to be kept waiting," she added. And for the first time since I'd entered the house, I understood something with chilling clarity. She didn't set the table because she was lonely. She set it because dinner was inevitable. It happened without warning. One moment, the dining room was lit by the weak afternoon light filtering through the tall windows and the dull yellow glow of an overhead fixture. The next, everything vanished at once. No flicker, no dimming, just darkness. The light cut out so cleanly it felt intentional, like a switch had been thrown somewhere far deeper than the walls. The house went silent with it. Not quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you're painfully aware of your own breathing. No hum of electricity, no distant traffic from the road below the hill, no wind against the windows. Nothing. I froze in my chair, my fingers still resting on the edge of the table. "Power's out," I said, more to reassure myself than anyone else. The widow didn't react. She sat perfectly still at the head of the table, her face unreadable in the darkness. I could make out only her outline now, a darker shape against the deeper black of the room. "That happens sometimes," she said calmly. Her voice sounded closer than it should have. I swallowed. "Do you want me to check the breaker?" "No," she replied immediately. The word was gentle, but firm enough to stop me from pushing my chair back. "I'll take care of it," she added. I felt my stomach tighten. Before I could respond, she stood. Her chair scraped softly against the floor, too softly, as if the sound had been swallowed before it could fully form. I heard her footsteps move away from the table. Slow, measured, unhurried. She didn't fumble in the dark, didn't pause to orient herself. She walked straight toward the hallway that led deeper into the house, her path unbroken by hesitation. I began. Her footsteps stopped. "No need," she said from the darkness ahead. "Please, stay where you are." Then she was gone. I sat there alone. The darkness felt thicker without her voice in the room. I couldn't see the table anymore, but I could feel it beneath my hands. Solid, unyielding. I shifted slightly and heard the faint scrape of my chair echo far louder than it should have. My breath sounded too loud. I forced myself to slow it. Inhale, exhale. I strained to hear something, anything, that might tell me the world outside the house still existed. A passing car, a dog barking, wind through the trees. There was nothing. The house wasn't just dark, it was sealed. Time stretched. Or maybe it compressed. I couldn't tell anymore. Without light, without sound, minutes lost their meaning. Somewhere in the distance, a door opened. I flinched. The sound didn't come from the hallway she'd disappeared into. It came from farther back, deeper. The part of the house I hadn't seen. I imagined her moving through rooms I didn't know existed, down corridors that had been closed off for years. I imagined doors being opened that had stayed shut for far too long. I told myself she was checking a fuse box. That was reasonable, logical. My mind clung to that explanation like a lifeline. A soft noise drifted toward me. Not footsteps, something else. A low, almost inaudible sound like fabric shifting, like chairs being touched, like something being prepared. My heart began to pound. "Hello?" I called, hating how thin my voice sounded in the darkness. No answer. I resisted the urge to stand up, to bolt for the front door. My body screamed at me to move, but my instincts warned me just as strongly not to. The darkness felt occupied, as if it was an empty space, but something that had weight and presence. I became acutely aware of the empty chairs around the table, the spaces where no one sat, the places I couldn't see but knew were there. For the first time since arriving, I wondered if the doors were still where I remembered them, if the hallway behind me still led to the entrance. Another sound. Closer now. I held my breath. Footsteps. Returning. Slow and steady. Exactly like before. The widow emerged from the darkness, her shape resolving just enough for me to see her outline again as she approached the table. She didn't look at me as she passed, moving back to her seat with the same unhurried confidence. She sat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights came back on. They didn't flicker into life. They turned on all at once, flooding the room with the same dull yellow glow as before. I blinked hard, my eyes burning as they adjusted. Relief surged through me, sharp and dizzying. "I'm glad that's," I started to say. The words died in my throat. The widow sat exactly where she had been before, but she was no longer alone. For a moment, my mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The room was exactly the same. The table, the chairs, the plates of food still steaming faintly. But it was no longer empty. The widow sat at the head of the table, her posture unchanged, her hands folded neatly in front of her. At first glance, she looked as she had before. Then I noticed her face. Her skin had lost its color, drained to a dull grayish pallor that reminded me of old paper left too long in the sun. The lines around her mouth were deeper now, pulled downward, as if gravity had suddenly remembered her. Her eyes looked sunken, shadowed, too large for her face. She looked used up, not injured, not decayed, but hollow, like something had passed through her and taken what little warmth had remained. My gaze shifted. The chairs around the table were no longer empty. They were occupied. A man sat to her right. Tall, thin, dressed in an old-fashioned suit that hung loosely on his frame. His hair was neatly combed, though patches of scalp showed through. The skin of his face was tight and discolored, pulled back from his teeth just enough to expose them in a way that made my stomach churn. To her left sat a woman, smaller, her back unnaturally straight. Her dress was faded, the fabric thin and worn. One side of her face sagged slightly, as if the muscles beneath had forgotten their purpose. Farther down the table, two more figures sat silently. An older man with a sunken chest, his collarbones sharp beneath his shirt. A woman whose hands rested in her lap, fingers twisted together, the skin mottled and blotched. They didn't slump. They didn't sway. They sat perfectly still, arranged with care, like guests who had arrived early and were waiting to be acknowledged. The smell hit me then. Not rot, not decay, something faintly sour, sweet and stale at the same time. The smell of a room that hadn't been opened in years, of clothes stored too long, of bodies that should not have been warm. I couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to stand, to run, to do anything but sit there staring at the dead. But my body wouldn't move. The widow lifted her head slightly and looked at me. Her eyes were dull now, clouded, yet somehow sharper than before. "You see them now," she said. Her voice was the same. That terrified me more than anything else. I tried to speak. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My tongue felt thick, uncooperative. The figures around the table turned their heads in unison, slowly, deliberately, their eyes fixed on me. Some were clouded over, milky and unfocused. Others were sunken but alert. All of them shared the same expression: expectation. None of them blinked. I noticed details my mind didn't want to acknowledge. A patch of skin missing behind one man's ear. Dark discoloration around another's mouth. Fingernails too long, yellowed, curling slightly inward. Their clothes were clean, carefully maintained, mended in places. Loved. The widow followed my gaze as it moved around the table. "My husband," she said softly, gesturing to the man beside her. "You can see how thin he's gotten. He never did eat enough." Her hand drifted toward him, resting lightly on his sleeve. He didn't react. "My sister," she continued, nodding toward the woman on her other side. "She was always quiet, even before." The woman's lips twitched, not into a smile, just moved. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. "And my parents," the widow said, indicating the others. "They come when they can. They don't always have the strength." I stared at the plate in front of me. The food looked untouched. Waiting. "Why?" I finally managed to whisper. The widow tilted her head. Her neck made a soft, dry sound as it moved. "Why what?" she asked. "Why, this," I said. "Why me?" She looked genuinely puzzled. "You came," she said simply. "You sat." One of the figures let out a low sound then. Not a word. A breath. Dry. Shallow. I flinched, my chair scraping loudly against the floor as I finally managed to move. The sound echoed through the room. Every head turned toward me again. All at once. "Please," I said, my voice shaking. "I think there's been a mistake." The widow's mouth curved into a smile. It stretched a little too far across her face, pulling at skin that no longer seemed flexible. "There are no mistakes," she said. "Not at the table." I pushed back from my chair, heart hammering. My legs felt weak, unsteady beneath me. The widow watched calmly as I stood. The others didn't move, didn't rise, didn't reach for me. They just watched, waiting. I took a step backward. The floor creaked beneath my foot, loud in the suffocating stillness. The widow folded her hands again, her fingers pale and thin. "You shouldn't leave before dinner," she said gently. The lights overhead hummed softly, too softly, as if they were struggling to stay on. And in that moment, with their eyes fixed on me and the smell of old rooms and colder things filling my lungs, I understood something with horrifying certainty. They weren't guests, they were residents, and the table was never meant to have empty seats. Panic doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in, thin and sharp, slipping between thoughts that are already struggling to keep up. By the time I realized I was afraid, my body had already decided what to do. I turned toward the hallway. I didn't run. Not at first. I took one step back, then another, my eyes never leaving the table. Every part of me screamed that if I turned my back on them, something would move. Something would cross the distance between us. Nothing did. The widow watched me calmly, her expression almost sympathetic. "Please," I said, my voice breaking. "I need to leave." The word leave seemed to ripple through the room. The man beside her, the one she had called her husband, opened his mouth. "So soon?" he asked. His voice was wrong. It came out evenly, pleasantly, but it didn't seem to originate from his chest. It sounded layered, like several voices pressed together into one. I staggered back another step. The woman across the table spoke next. "You've only just arrived." Her lips barely moved. Then they all spoke. Together. "Why are you in such a hurry?" The sound filled the room, not loud, not aggressive, just complete. It wrapped around me from every direction, leaving no space to think. I spun and bolted for the hallway. I made it 3 steps before the front door slammed shut. The sound was deafening. I froze, heart pounding, staring at the door as the lock turned on its own. Metal sliding into place with a heavy, final click. "No," I whispered. I grabbed the handle and twisted hard. It didn't move. Behind me, something scraped across the floor. I turned just in time to see a heavy cabinet slide several inches, shifting itself across the doorway to the hall. A chair tipped over and dragged along the floor, wedging itself beneath the handle of a side door. No hands touched them. They moved anyway. The house was closing. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Please stop!" The widow rose slowly from her chair. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as if she didn't want to frighten me. "There's no need for that," she said gently. "You're safe here." The others stood as well. They moved in unison, chairs sliding back without a sound. Their bodies were stiff, joints protesting quietly, but they remained upright, composed. "You don't have to go back out there," the sister said. "It's lonely." "You're welcome here," the father added. "We take care of our own." I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. There was nowhere left to retreat. "What do you want from me?" I asked. The question came out hoarse, barely recognizable as my own voice. They didn't answer. The widow stepped closer. Up close, the changes in her face were impossible to ignore. Her skin was thin, translucent in places. Dark veins showed beneath the surface. Her eyes, once sharp and alert, now looked tired, ancient. Yet her smile was warm. "We want you to stay," she said. "That's all." "I don't belong here," I said. "I'm not family." She tilted her head. "Not yet," she replied. The others nodded. Slowly, together. "You sat at the table," her husband said. "You accepted the place," her sister added. "You were invited," her mother whispered. The room felt smaller with every word, the walls pressing inward, the ceiling lowering just enough to make breathing feel difficult. I tried one last door. It didn't budge. I pounded on it with both fists until my hands ached, until the sound echoed back at me hollow and meaningless. Laughter drifted from behind me, soft, pleasant, almost kind. "Don't hurt yourself," the widow said. "There's no rush." I turned slowly. They stood in a loose semicircle now, blocking every path that might have led away from the dining room. Their eyes followed me, tracking every movement, patient and unblinking. The table behind them waited, 6 place settings, 1 chair still empty. My chair. The realization hit me then, heavy and absolute, settling into my chest with a weight I knew I would never shake. No one leaves this house. Not the living, not the dead. Not once they've taken a seat. They didn't grab me. That was the worst part. No hands closed around my arms, no sudden force dragged me across the floor. Instead, they moved slowly, calmly, stepping closer one by one, tightening the space around me without ever touching me. Guiding, corralling. Every step I took backward brought me closer to the table again. I felt the edge of it press against the backs of my legs, solid and immovable. "There," the widow said softly. "That's your place." The chair stood exactly where it had before, pulled out, waiting. I shook my head, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "Please," I whispered. "I'll leave. I won't tell anyone, I swear." No one reacted. Her husband reached out, not to me, but to the chair, and pushed it in gently until it touched the back of my knees. The sound was quiet. Final. I collapsed into the seat. The moment I sat down, something shifted in the room. Not visibly, not dramatically. Just enough that I felt it, deep in my chest, like a pressure settling where panic had been. The widow returned to her place at the head of the table. Up close, there was no denying what she was anymore. Her skin had thinned further, drawn tight across bone. Dark patches showed beneath the surface, veins branching like fine cracks in old porcelain. Her eyes were sunken now, rimmed with shadow, yet focused with unsettling clarity. She looked at me the way someone looks at a loved one who has finally come home after being gone too long. Relieved, the others resumed their seats as well, chairs sliding softly across the floor. Once settled, they folded their hands or rested them in their laps, postures eerily polite. No one spoke. The food began to cool. The widow picked up her fork. So did the others. Their movements were synchronized, deliberate. They ate slowly, methodically, as if following a routine practiced countless times before. I stared at the plate in front of me. The food still looked warm, fresh, inviting. My hands trembled as I lifted the fork. I didn't remember deciding to do it. I only realized I had when the metal touched my fingers. It felt right. Familiar. The widow watched me with quiet approval. "Good," she said. "You'll get used to it." I swallowed hard. My throat burned. "Time passes differently here," she continued. "But you won't mind. None of us do." Her husband smiled at me, lips pulling back from teeth that no longer quite fit his mouth. Her sister nodded gently, eyes dull but attentive. They weren't threatening me. They weren't angry. They were welcoming me. The realization settled over me slowly, like a heavy blanket being drawn up around my shoulders. This was never about trapping me. It was about keeping me. The widow leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on the table. Her voice was soft, intimate, almost tender. "You've been so alone," she said. "You don't have to be anymore." I tried to speak. No words came. She smiled then, wide, genuine, and full of something that might once have been love. And she said quietly, with absolute certainty, "You belong to the family now."